Happy birthday to you. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. First of all, Professor Avloniti, thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor, it's a great pleasure. And number two, I want to thank the professor for agreeing to allow me to speak in English. You're very lucky, actually, that he did agree, because if I spoke Greek, you wouldn't understand a word, I'm sure. My Greek is not great. It's not great at all. Years ago, I worked for one of the most demanding clients I've ever had in my life, a guy called Sergio Zeman. We used to call him the Ayatollah. He was the chief marketing officer of the Coca-Cola company. And he wrote a book. And the basic thesis of the book was that marketing is too important to be left to the marketing department. He was not suggesting for a minute that the CEO should get involved in brochures. But he was suggesting something else. That especially in today's world, one of the basic core essentials of marketing, consumer focus, has to be the focus of the entire organization. And there's only one person inside a company that can truly allow that to happen all the way down the hierarchy, and that is the CEO. I was shocked a couple of years ago, George knows about this, when I was watching television one afternoon and one of our ministers appeared on screen discussing how he intended to close all the marketing departments in Greece. And he said, marketing. Marketing. And I remember the tonality. And I immediately replied to him. I challenged him immediately, on Facebook, by the way. And I got a call within minutes asking me, please, to remove the post. He says, your Greek's not good enough, you didn't understand me. My Greek's not that bad, I can tell you. Made in Greece. Let's just deal with one huge fallacy. There is nothing wrong with made in Greece. On the contrary, if I had time, I would share with you transcripts from many focus groups that I've attended in New York, in London, in Berlin, in Amsterdam. Made in Greece is something the world values. Because the world values Greece. The world values. The world values it even more today than they did before the crisis. Because awareness of Greece is just that much higher. And what is happening today, for example, in food, plays completely into Greece's hands. We own something called the Greek Mediterranean diet. Made in Greece being a bad thing is a fallacy. Ask Aris Kefalogiannis, Gia Oils. Ask Nikos Koutsounia from Apivita. Ask Green Cola. 29 countries, there's a cola which originates from Greece, which is being sold around the world. Ask Vangelis Ierovasiliou. There he is. They're calling his wines in New York the Greek wine revolution. Made in Greece, proudly made in Greece, with a name which is impossible to pronounce, Ierovasiliou, unless you're Greek, of course. Ask Kleeman Elevators. Ask Prisma Electronics in Alexandroupoli, where they're making computer chips for NASA. And I heard a story a little while ago from a certain Mr. Gizelis, who was sitting behind me, about robotics being made in Attica. There's nothing wrong with made in Greece. I think there's a much bigger challenge, which is the challenge to become exceptionally good marketeers to realize the potential that is behind made in Greece, because the potential is there. Can anybody tell me what sound that is? I hear Harley Davidson, right? Harley Davidson. Unmistakable sound. That sound is a part of that brand, an integral part of that brand. Can anybody tell me what sound this is? That's next year's Harley Davidson. It's electric. Now imagine being Harley Davidson. You got this legacy brand where your sound is part of what you're all about. But the world around you is changing, and you've got to change your sound. You're touching the heart of your brand, especially with guys like that. That's a big decision. Now, if you're Vespa, it's easy. That's a far more sensitive, feminine, caring kind of brand. Well, Vespa's also got an electric, that's it. A contemporary work of art with a caring, technological heart. Ferrari. 2016, they asked the CEO of Ferrari, he passed away earlier this year, by the way, when he'd launch an electric car. Here was his answer: "You'll have to shoot me first." Who said that? You're a bad guy. You're a bad guy. So that was in March 2016. They asked him the same question in January of this year. There was his answer: if there's an electric supercar to be built, then Ferrari will be the first. And in fact, that is the electric Ferrari. We're living under the volcano. Today's environment is volatile and unpredictable. Change erupts, and business needs to respond, and fast. We used to talk about disruption. I think it's become eruption. Before you know it, it's happened. This over here is the Gartner survey from 2016, CEOs across industries all over the world. 50% expect complete, that's 9%, or 41% expect substantial industry transformation by 2020. 50% of CEOs. There's the fourth industrial revolution. We're living it right now. We've gone through steam, into electricity, the digital revolution, and now we're talking about the tech fusion revolution. All that kind of scary stuff there. Artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, VR, AR, all that kind of stuff. That's not science fiction anymore. Whoever's got an iPhone 10 has got face recognition. That's exactly this, where the digital, the biological, and the physical worlds start to merge together. It's happening. Under the volcano, brand comes first. And I'm going to tell you why I'm saying that. George mentioned the diffusion of innovation. By the way, I think it's the most useful curve in marketing. To me, there's nothing like it. This particular innovation diffused very rapidly. I was reading the other day, there are more cell phones on this planet than there are toothbrushes, which is quite phenomenal. It's quite phenomenal. That's what the curve looks like. It's a normal distribution curve. And of course, we've got the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and at the end, the laggards. The change makers, the early responders, the late responders, and the laggards. This is where the volume is, and businesses obviously need to protect current revenues through continuous improvement. But that over there is where tomorrow's volumes are built, and businesses need to look to the future. That's the so-called tipping point, where upstream ideas go mainstream, they cross over into the big time, and that over there is what I've called the point of no return, where mainstream becomes has-been. And that's a very dangerous place to be. So what happens, and it's a simple fact of life, upstream becomes mainstream, becomes has-been, and it just carries on and on and on. And if you're not riding that curve, you've got a problem. Take the telephone. My grandmother used to use one of those right at the end. Look at where we are today. Incremental change is used to enhance and improve current products and services to protect current revenue streams. It's when companies innovate in the mainstream. Step change creates new products and services which will move mainstream to provide tomorrow's revenue streams. If you don't do it, someone else will. And there's the most famous case of Kodak. Kodak invented the digital camera. The CEO saw it and said, that's going to ruin our business, hide it away. And a couple of years later, Fuji launched digital cameras. That was the end of Kodak. They no longer exist. Like most companies, you're probably focused here. This makes your company vulnerable to disruption, especially from outside the industry. Incremental change is focused on efficiency and the reduction of obvious friction points. Removing customer pain points is what I often hear. Protecting the status quo is what it's all about, and it depends on an understanding of current organizational and customer problems. Step change is focused on new customer experiences, creating customer wow points through better, more connected customer experiences. Step change results from asking new questions, like, can you imagine a world without photographic film? And step change depends on the anticipation of unarticulated customer needs. Even when a project is initiated in the mainstream area, it needs a mirror which reflects broader context on this side of the curve. Category trends, broader societal trends, consumer expectations, technological capabilities, and it needs an answer to the question, what does tomorrow look like? One of the biggest obstacles standing in the way of step change innovation is culture. That has to be broken down. I've done a lot of work, especially during the past few years, on what I call cultural recalibration to help companies deal with change. And I'm going to share with you some of the stuff that I've found in work that I've done with clients. The biggest single thing that holds back innovation is this thing called inertia, this tendency not to do anything, to remain unchanged, or at best, to have motion going backwards and forwards, just like those little balls that I showed you. And these are real quotes from clients, things I've heard. It's cultural inertia which leads to innovation inertia. People don't get it because they've never been required to get it, I've heard. The second thing is cultural rejection, the black sheep syndrome. And here are some real quotes again. One answer would be to bring in outsiders. We tried that. The organization rejects them. Innovation teams, that does not work. Reject anything that smells of elitism. The third one, the B2B fallacy. I heard somebody say to me, this is B2B. We sell to the C-suite, to the top leaders who buy rational benefits. They don't care about the human experience. And my answer to that is rubbish. There's no such thing as B2B. Corporations don't sell to corporations. People in corporations sell to people in other corporations. It's all P to P, person to person. Conway's Law, this is a great one. Any organization that designs a system will inevitably produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. That's a quote from Melvin Conway. So really what he's saying is that the organization's communication structure reflects culture, and therefore that structure reflects systems that the organization designs. Makes sense. So there are 4 of the key cultural obstacles that I found: inertia, cultural rejection, the B2B fallacy, and Conway's law. We need to recalibrate culture. And I don't mean change. I'm not saying rebrand. I'm saying recalibrate brand. And let me explain that. Your brand is probably built on your legacy, on where you are strong in the middle of that curve. That's where your market is. Makes sense. Brand needs to shift out to the left to embrace innovation. And brand needs to express belief and values. It needs to be expressed in a narrative. It needs to inspire, to enable, to guide, and to align. And brand must work from the inside out. We used to think of brand as added value. I believe that today, brand is foundational value for everything that the corporation does. Huge difference there. I'm going to give you the example of Apple. 1997, Apple was there. Their products were slow, they were expensive. Windows 96 had just come out, Windows 95 in fact. It was in fact better than Apple, and Windows was sitting on this side of the curve. Apple was about to close down. They were almost bankrupt. Steve Jobs went back, and this is the piece of advertising that he went out with.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
I just want to point out a couple of things inside there. There's not a single computer in that commercial because there were no computers worth selling. That was August 1997. The first bubble iMacs came out in January of 1998. Number 2, this commercial went out on television around the world, but the real objective was to switch the internal culture, to calibrate the culture, to make Apple people capable of innovating, of creating the future. It really was a calibration of culture, not a shift, a calibration to open it up to innovation. That, of course, became the foundation. That's what happened to Apple overnight. Apple became the innovative company. And it expressed that in everything that it did. The result of all of this, 12 years later, Apple, which was, I remind you, almost bankrupt in 1997, became the world's most valuable corporation ever. Jack Welch from GE put it very well. He said, the chief role of the CEO is to be the chief meaning officer, to give meaning to what people do. And he added to that, the second role is to be the chief fun officer. Give people meaning and make it fun for them to do amazing stuff. By the way, nothing new about that. That's Avis in the 60s. We Try Harder. Brilliant, brilliant bit of branding. And I'd like to read this to you. It's really quite phenomenal. It says, Avis needs you, you don't need Avis. Avis never forgets this. We're still a little hungry. We're only number 2 in rent-a-cars. Customers aren't a dime a dozen to us. Sometimes when business is too good, they get the short end and aren't treated like customers anymore. Wouldn't you like the novel experience of walking up to a counter and not feel you're bothering somebody? Try it. Come to the Avis counter and rent a new Ford. Avis is only number 2 in rent-a-cars, so we have to try harder to make our customers feel like customers. Our counters all have 2 sides, and we know which side our bread is buttered on. That creates an internal culture where you cannot not behave in that kind of way. Because it's all pervasive and it's out there. Starbucks, 28,000 stores around the world selling expensive, not so great coffee. 28,000 cafeterias. When we are fully engaged, we connect with, laugh with, and uplift the lives of our customers, even if just for a few moments. Sure, it starts with the promise of a perfectly made beverage, but our work goes far beyond that. It's really about human connection.
If people say your dreams are crazy, if they laugh at what you think you can do, good. Stay that way. Because what non-believers fail to understand is that calling a dream crazy is not an insult. It's a compliment. Don't try to be the fastest runner in your school or the fastest in the world. Be the fastest ever. Don't picture yourself wearing OBJ's jersey. Picture OBJ wearing yours. Don't settle for homecoming queen or linebacker. Do both. Lose 120 pounds and become an Ironman after beating a brain tumor. Don't believe you have to be like anybody to be somebody. If you're born a refugee, don't let it stop you from playing soccer for the national team at age 16. Don't become the best basketball player on the planet. Be bigger than basketball. Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. When they talk about the greatest team in the history of the sport, make sure it's your team. If you have only one hand, don't just watch football, play it at the highest level. And if you're a girl from Compton, don't just become a tennis player. Become the greatest athlete ever. Yeah, that's more like it. So don't ask if your dreams are crazy. Ask if they're crazy enough.
Again, with a brand like that, it really creates a common corporate culture where the entire corporation starts to behave like that. And that's the real power of brand. The best or nothing, Mercedes-Benz. And of course, Google. Google doesn't advertise. They've got the most amazing premises which say everything about who they are. The culture is contained in how they work every day. Today, the biggest threat to established companies probably comes from outside the industry, and it's probably a startup that no one's heard of yet. It might be next door, or it might be on the other side of the world. Airbnb, 2 kids in San Francisco with a spare room in their apartment who bought some air beds. That's where Airbnb comes from. Today, they got the world's largest hospitality company, and they don't own a single building. There's no way that Hilton Hotels could think like this. No way, because their culture wouldn't allow them to go there. Think like a startup. And here's one of the best definitions of startup that I've come across. A startup is a company working to solve a problem where the solution is not obvious and success is not guaranteed. And that reflects what Steve Jobs always used to say. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. I didn't know I needed 1,000 songs in my pocket. If anybody had asked me, I would have said, make me smaller CDs, please. 1,000 songs in your pocket? What for? Google, the perfect search engine, understands exactly what you mean and gives you back exactly what you want. Or the most famous one of all. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So you need to calibrate your brand and get out onto the edge of that curve. We used to call it thinking out of the box. I think it's thinking out of where the market is delivering profit and revenue. You've got to get out of that space. I showed you this motor car earlier. It's called the Millennial, I guess with pretty good reason. It's designed for that generation, the me generation. And here's what Time magazine says about them. Millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists who still live with their parents. Second line, why they'll save us all. Let's look at some reality about millennials, and this is quite scary. They are people born between 1981 and 1997. In other words, today they're between 21 years old and 37 years old. There are 2 billion millennials on the planet. It's the world's largest demographic. They're not about to grow up. That's just the way they are. Unilever says the following: we don't think of them as special or different anymore. They're the core of our business. Unilever is saying that. I can understand millennials being the core of your business if you're selling cool technology. We're talking about soap powders. Yeah. Some insight into how millennials behave. I think this comment over here captures it all. People are curating and streamlining their lives. They don't just want more stuff. They want products and services that make their lives better. People want better and more connected experiences. This over here, millennials prioritize experiences over stuff. I do a lot of work in the super yacht industry. I'm talking about massive super yachts, 100 meters and over, and that's where the industry is starting to think. Own the experience as opposed to the yacht. So, my conclusion to a lot of this stuff, there's more to technology than technology. Yes, technology is under that volcano, but there's much more to technology than just technology. There are people, and people who want better and more connected experiences. Let's not forget one thing. Today's consumers have a voice, and they use it. I spent my life in advertising, and my God, that industry has really been disrupted. And I'm sure a lot of people in advertising are asking, what happened to my job? Some research over here from 2017, Bank of America in the States. And this question is the most important item in your everyday life. Number 1, my smartphone. Number 2, toothbrush. Number 3, deodorant. Way down the list, coffee. So we talk about smelly, connected people, right? Interaction. People interact more with their smartphone than with virtually anything else in their lives today. And clearly that is not working. Clearly that's not working. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the new TV. And in this world, you're no longer who you say you are. You are who people tell each other you are. In other words, it's what you do and what you don't do, and what you say and what you don't say that really counts. And in order to guide that, you need very powerful internal branding. If you want people to talk about you on social media, do things that people will talk about. I never go on Facebook and say, I had an okay lunch today. I'll talk about an amazing lunch or an amazingly bad lunch. And that's just the way that social media works. So we need to create wow points. Not just one, and here's the challenge. Lots and lots of them. Continuously. Because as Aristotle said, we are what we consistently do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit. By the way, the more I'm involved with brands, the more I understand that Aristotle, he kind of said it all. Ethos, logos, pathos. That's really what it's all about. Back to Greece. A couple of years ago, that's what happened with the crisis. And I truly believe that Made in Greece is not the slightest bit of a problem. I think that we really need exceptionally good marketing. And I agree completely with what George was saying in his intro. We really have to jack that one up a lot. Because if we do that, that thing breaks. Unity. I want to close with one of my favorite quotes from the master of great experiences, Walt Disney, where he said the following: it's kind of fun to do the impossible. And finally, with one of my real heroes, Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you again for having me here. Great honor, great pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.